Welcome to the Manage Self Lead Others podcast. My name is Nina Sunday, and I'm so pleased to be talking today with Nigel Paine, who I met in Australia when he came out to Australia a few years ago. Welcome, Nigel.
Thank you very much indeed, Nina. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
And at the time that I did a one-day workshop with Nigel, he was presenting a pre-convention workshop for the Australian Institute of Training and Development. Nigel was the former head of learning and development at the BBC television and was involved in a project where they rolled out leadership training to about 6,000 staff. That was an amazing project, Nigel.
It was a big project. It was the first time there'd ever been any attempt at a comprehensive leadership development program for everyone who led more than 3 people in the organization. So it was a lot at stake, a lot of pressure on me to deliver. And we tried to do something original, something that would basically change the organization forever. That was the modest aspirations. So it was not about making people think about leadership. It was making people change their behavior, fundamentally change their behavior, and therefore change the organization. That was the aim.
Right. And you've written 8 books. You've got a professorship at the
Napier University.
Yes,
which is in Edinburgh. Yes.
Yeah. And you also lecture in the doctorate program at the Chicago Business School.
Yes, I do executive development for Chicago Booth Business School, but mostly in the Middle East and in London. I'm working with they've got a campus in London, so I work with their London campus rather than with Chicago. Right. I rarely go to Chicago. And I also teach for the University of Pennsylvania on a doctoral program, which I'm also an academic director of that doctoral program. It's called the CLO program. And University of Pennsylvania is an Ivy League university based in Philadelphia. And I'm very proud of that program. I've been with it since it began, and it's now in its 14th year.
Well, I'm very proud to have your esteemed self on our podcast today. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I'd like to mention that during that workshop, one of the things that you mentioned in passing when you were talking about the shift from abstract theories in leadership training to behaviour-based training, you mentioned Google's Project Oxygen. You only mentioned it once, but my ears pricked up, my curiosity was awakened, and that has taken me down a path for the last few years, where when I do my own leadership presenting and training, I frequently refer to the 8 good behaviours of a manager as described by Google's Project Oxygen. So I want to thank you for putting me on a path that I consider to be a good one.
Thank you, Nina. What I liked about it was when you think about Google, the might of Google, they could have paid for anybody to come and deliver anything to them. But instead, they looked at internally, they looked within, and they looked at what differentiated their best leaders from their not so good leaders. And they focused Project Oxygen not on their best leaders, because they were doing fine. They focused on bringing up their weakest leaders to at least competent, if not better than competent. And therefore, it was about behavior, and it was about encouraging people to follow those behaviors. And it's all data-based. They brought those behaviors, emerged from masses of data that they crunched. So I thought it was a very interesting model for leadership development. And in my leadership book, I write about Project Oxygen. Now, it's a long time ago now. It's kind of lost in the midst of time, probably inside Google, but I think it's still relevant as an approach, an evidence-based approach, focusing on changing behavior. And it was transformational inside the company.
Well, the good news is, Nigel, is that Google is continuing with that, the 8 good behaviours. They've actually identified another 2. They're evolving the Project Oxygen idea. And here are the new 2 ones, or the 2 new ones. Number 9, collaborates across Google, so about collaboration. And number 10 is a strong decision maker.
Yes, good. Both of those relevant.
Yeah.
And that's also close to my heart because that my whole fundamental philosophy about learning culture is that it's about collaboration across the organization. It's not an individual thing. It's not a department or a team thing. It's across the whole organization. That's what makes the difference, sharing information. And I think as Google got bigger and more complex and was working in more countries, it lost that a little bit. It lost that collaboration, and it's tried very hard to pull it back again.
Oh, right, right. And so having myself being on that path of looking at the 8 good behaviours, being a manager is a good coach, and they support their team members, if they have any issues at home, such as maybe children having to study for exams or aging parents, or maybe there's a health issue. And of course, many of us have family members facing health issues at the moment. One of the things when I went to your website to invite you to speak was I discovered that you were referring to some brand new research by the Josh Bersin Academy, whose papers and blog articles I was reading avidly about 5 years ago. It's called the Big Reset Playbook, and it's available for anybody free if they want to Google the...
Yep, completely free.
Yeah. And reading that, it kind of describes, and I'll let you tell us more about it, it describes kind of a process that companies and organizations have been going through since COVID started, and while we're still in the midst of it. So what has Bersin sort of nailed and identified?
Well, what he's getting at is that we're in the middle of a process now with the current kind of crisis. I guess I know it's cliche to say the COVID crisis, but all or the very large majority of our organizations have had to adjust to something really crippling and dynamic and very, very complicated. And what Bersin has come up with is a few simple processes that you need to go through. So he's basically saying that the first stage is having to deal with it. So react, make decisions, respond instantly, patch over, use sticking plaster, hack it together with tape, whatever, respond, get stuff done. The next one is begin to develop new protocols. So think about what's changed, what you want to retain, what you don't want to retain. And then the final stage of his playbook is transform. So take the new stuff, use it, embed it, build back better. That's my phrase, build back better. So don't just try and go back to where you were before. Don't try and live in a world of sticking plaster and sticky tape. Live in a world where you've thought it through, where you can do new things better than you did before, and transform your organization so that as we return back to something a little bit more approaching normal, make it a better world, better for your employees, more productive, more customer focused, whatever it is. So that's what he's talking about. There's a pathway to transformation.
And it's very much a part of what we've had to do in order to survive and thrive. We've had to make changes that somehow we want to keep the baby and only throw out the bathwater. So we want to actually keep those things that actually work now. For example, before COVID, employers were very reluctant to let people work from home. And maybe they don't want people to work entirely from home when we can actually go back to work. But there seems to be this push for hybrid working, where it is now more acceptable to work from home as well as from office. And also, we don't have to worry that people are going to slack off because they're actually working harder from home than ever before. I mean, I don't know how we can explain that phenomenon. Why are people working harder?
It's basically, if you give people a little bit of slack, you get a lot back in terms of productivity, that no one really is ever going to go back to horrible, long commutes, having to be in a place by a certain time in the morning, having to be there. I call it presenteeism. That yes. Presenteeism leads to people just doing what they can, the minimum. Giving people a bit of slack, saying, let's try to make work fit better in with your life, you get more engagement, more energy, and higher productivity. That doesn't mean that I think everyone will work forever from home, but I don't think we'll ever go back to everyone working always from the office.
And I think the other trend that is coming out is that people in organizations don't want to be told, well, now that COVID's over, you have to come back to work. It's like staff in organizations want to feel like their needs are being listened to and met, and there's flexibility.
Yeah, I agree. It's basically, it's like my theory that the micro-bullying manager is now dead. That you just bullies, people not helping, simply trying to put pressure, will push back. In a COVID world where your manager is a long way away from you physically, you can say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. No, that's impossible in this context. So those people begin to look stupid and irrelevant. The manager who says, how can I help? What can I do to support you? What kind of productivity do you need? What time do you need to finish this project? How can I speed that up? Can I put you in touch with? They're the managers who revealed massive productivity gains by being supportive. The exact opposite. The bullies showed that they destroyed productivity. They're never going to come back. That's not going to change. But I think what we've got now is people having the courage to say what they want more articulately than they ever dared to before.
That's right.
So I think we're in a new era.
One of the things that Bersin talks about is the rise of trust.
Yes.
And
trust is very important.
Support.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you've got everyone working from home, surrounded by cats, children, and often partners, then you have to trust that people will get on and do their best. And by and large, the vast majority of people are good people who want to do their best. And trying to force them to be visible, force them to sign in, force them to give a minute account of what they did every day, betraying that trust, is incredibly destructive.
Exactly.
Appreciating that trust is fundamental. And in my book, in my learning culture book, the workplace learning book, trust is fundamental. What I'm saying in the book is, without trust, nothing else falls into place. You cannot build a learning culture. You cannot create learning organizations where there's no trust. Why would I tell you anything if I don't trust what you're going to do with it? Why would I? Why would I share anything with you? Why would I ever admit I don't know anything or I screwed up on that if I don't trust you? Exactly. Trust is what creates openness and sharing and an acknowledgement that we're in a learning process. We're not learned, we're learners. Without trust, we hide it all. We pretend we know more than we do. We pretend that we are infallible, and we pretend that no one can help us. And
it's not based on authenticity. It's based on superficial lack of self-confidence, really.
Yeah. Fear. It's based on fear. Lack of trust is fear.
And love.
Fear that you're going to be humiliated, fear that you're going to be fired, fear that you're going to be punished in some way.
That's right. Look, Bersin talks about learning all the time being a trend, and that's definitely, your book was published January this year, isn't that right? Workplace learning?
Yeah, it came out at a perfect time in a way, because, and I think a lot of the model in the book, the processes in the book have been validated. I know there's still a lot of debate about whether learning culture is far too nebulous to be anything to aim for. But I actually think that if you focus on my fundamental conditions for building a learning culture, you will make your organization better, happier, and more successful. Even if you still don't quite get there to the learning culture, you're on a journey. It's a process. It's not a product. And if people get that message, I think that they will, A, be more resilient and able to deal with things like COVID, and B, create more productive and happier workplaces. And I think that's very important, particularly in this climate. It's very important.
And in this paper, Bersin quotes the Sanofi example where they wanted staff to learn. And so that they set a goal of a number of hours of learning per employee. And yet, aren't there some organisations that are going, oh, you know, we don't know what's happening, so we'll just tighten the purse strings and we won't do any learning until we know what's happening? Are they the ones that are not going to thrive when recovery happens?
They're the ones that see learning as a cost, as an add-on when it's possible, when the circumstances are right. And one of the things that I don't think anyone would argue with me in saying that one of the things that has emerged from this crisis is that we don't know enough to be able to deal with it. We need to learn new things. We need to try new approaches. We need to innovate. We need to reframe. And how you can do those things without learning, I don't know. So that I would agree, those organizations which have sacked their learning departments, and a number have done that, are the ones that are going to struggle most. Those that have embraced learning, have encouraged staff to find out, to communicate, to think about the issues more deeply, are the ones that are going to come through it smoother, quicker, and re-establish faster.
Exactly, because it seems to me that if they've sacked their learning department, they're trying to act as if it's, things are normal, status quo, and it's going to require an innovative, adaptive approach moving forward into the future.
Yeah, I think so. It's about flexibility, agility, resilience, and those things come with people who have a growth mindset, who believe in their ability to learn, believe in their ability to do things differently. And if you've got an organization which is saying the opposite, i.e., you just do what you're told, you just carry on doing it in the same way, but just do more of it and work harder, that's the way forward. They won't be ever resilient, and they won't be agile, and they'll run into brick walls.
And these are the managers that treat their staff as if, they bark orders at them. And it's almost like creating a parent-child relationship instead of adult to adult.
It's saying, don't think, just do. And in a world where thinking is really important, working it out, trying to adapt and cope. And if you put someone working from home, struggling without the networks, IT networks, and without the normal network of people, and say, don't think, just do, I think that's a recipe for absolute disaster. You need people to work it out for themselves, to adapt, to build new pathways of communication. And what's been very interesting is that organizations with very locked down, secure communications networks, which have really struggled in this remote universe. One of the interesting things is even big companies, IT has failed because it can't really cope with new locations outside the building. Those organizations, the innovative, interesting staff have said things like, let's just set up a WhatsApp group and not tell anyone. So they built their own communication path. Let's set up a Slack group and not tell anyone. So they're managing to cope by innovating. But organizations have to catch up with that and have to recognize that in new times, we need new ways of doing things, and imposing the old ways, even when they're not working. It's like, when you're in a hole, stop digging. These people are in a hole and they're just digging more and more furiously and frantically, and it's not working. And I'm not surprised.
Yes, there's a principle in innovation called building the plane while flying the plane. I love that metaphor.
It's true. Well, that's what we're doing. Essentially, organizations are reassembling themselves as they're going along, working out new ways.
Yeah.
And they've done it amazingly.
Sorry?
They've done it brilliantly. Some organizations have been absolutely stunning at the way they've turned on a pinhead, and I really admire them. And others have just gone crashing into problem after problem.
Now, your book was written before COVID. What would be a theme that you would, for your next book, what would be a theme that you would add that it wasn't something you would talk about until COVID arose? But
I've been asked to do a second edition of the book, which I'm going to deliver next year. Right. So I will have a chance to go back and re-examine the book in the light of COVID. But I think the things that I would reinforce are this constant remaking, this idea of being restless and never being satisfied. Nothing is ever fixed for very long, and creating a culture in the organization where staff don't find that a real, oh no, not again, but see that as being an exciting, dynamic and learning environment. So I'd emphasize the need for a growth mindset, and emphasize the need to share, and emphasize for organizations to take on that learning. And I think one of the things that I've learned in the last few months is that there is a difference between individuals in organizations learning and organizational learning. and I know that sounds crazy, but I think it's true, that organizations need to learn. And organizations learn in the spaces between individuals. So it's creating the resilience of organizational learning, so that it doesn't matter whether individuals come and go, the organizational learning continues.
Yes.
And that isn't reinforced clearly enough in the book, but it will be in the second edition, that I promise you.
Well, it's great that your book is so recently published, because it's a perfect opportunity to revise it and put out a second edition. And where can people get your book, Nigel?
They get it from the publisher, Kogan Page, www.kogan, KOGANPAGE.com. And if you look up my author page, I've got my 3 books are all published by Kogan Page, are all on the same page. If you order one of them, if you put in Friends of Nigel in capital letters as one word, so Friends of Nigel, that gives you a 20% discount at checkout.
I'll post that in the podcast notes so people can...
Can't be more generous than that. 20% discount.
That's excellent. Thank you. I'm sure our listeners will be very, very keen to get your book, Nigel. So and second edition will be even more fabulous. Look, I've thoroughly enjoyed talking with you. I mean, I could go on for another 20 minutes, but our time has come to an end. Thank you so much for beaming in from London. Is it London?
It's a pleasure. Yes, from London, indeed, the centre of London.
London
That's
to
where I am at the
Brisbane,
moment.
Australia. So
yeah, London to Brisbane. What an amazing journey. And I hope one day I'll be back in Brisbane. Who knows when? I've been trying to get to Australia since April. I'm now trying in November to get to Australia, but it means quarantine and there's so few people allowed into Australia. I'm in a queue. 30,000 Australians are trying to get back to Australia at the moment. I'm just one of them.
Oh, wow.
But I'll get there. I will get there.
We'll see you in Australia soon. All right.
You will see me as soon as I possibly can. Thank you, Nina. Thank you so much for talking.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. We've been speaking with Nigel Paine, and this is the Manage Self, Lead Others podcast. And till next time,